Well, I'm so glad that you're here. How is studying going for you?
It's overwhelming. I think I get it, and then I take the practice quizzes, and somehow I'm still missing a lot and stuff. I think my biggest problem is these exercises, and then where they need. I think those are the questions I'm missing the most of, and I heard it's quite a bit, maybe even 10 questions and stuff. So that's the part. I think I've got the most of the other stuff down and know what I'm doing, but it's more the exercises and where it belongs and like picking
Right.
I always think, oh, it's a single leg, then that's a balance, but then they're like, and it'll be wrong because they're like, no, it's a strength exercise. um,
Right. No, I totally get that. Knowing the progressions and regressions within the OPT model can be something that's a little confusing, especially if, you're
and I've
you're
never done anything in like, I'm even looking up, what exercises are and stuff. So like, I'm like
yeah.
really new to this.
No, well, we'll go over some of that. Today we're going to go over overactive and underactive muscles. And I am, and just for people on the recording, I'm Ashley Garcia. I am the NASM instructor here with Show Up Fitness. And so we help you guys pass NASM rather quickly. And what we want you to know is we don't want you guys to read the book from start to finish and take more than 30 days to study for this thing and then pass it, because we have enough resources here and a track record of helping people pass. We've helped over 4,600 people pass this thing in a rather quick time frame compared to when people spend a lot of money on NASM and all the different textbook certs that they have and then take 6 months or even a year to study and then get discouraged.
Right.
You mentioned taking the practice test. I also, tell my clients, listen, don't take a lot of those. I mean, you can until you start scoring over 80, 85 points and feel good about that, but they're taking those questions from a pool of over 1,000, and you
Right.
don't know if they're
What you're
taking the
going to
ones
get.
that are most known to be covered on the exam. So we help you identify what those topics are so that you don't waste a ton of time on being quizzed on questions that you'll probably never see.
Right. Yeah.
Nutrition is an example of that because they want you to get the nutrition certification. Um,
Right. But
so
it's also these like little questions that'll throw me off that I keep getting wrong. Like one of them yesterday was like, what should a pregnant woman not, it was like light jogging. And one of them was, stepping. And of course I was like, of course, I mean, pregnant women can jog, but, and they shouldn't be stepping probably, doing step classes. But of course the answer was jogging. And I'm like, how, well, like, like
yeah, it's funny.
to miss these questions is where I'm like, my score is like going down. Not the stuff that I know. It's these little, the things that are not like completely memorized, or I'm thinking, oh, okay, it's okay if I don't cover this section, I can like figure something out. But it's in these, especially the pregnant ones where it's like, and they're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, they shouldn't be. One of them was, it was like they shouldn't be. I think dynamic stretching and all that stuff. And it's like, oh, they shouldn't dynamic stretch. And I'm like, why? I mean, I did everything when I was pregnant.
Well, exactly. And a lot
No.
of the information that's in NASM has been debunked and known to be they science has moved beyond that
Right.
at this point, but they haven't updated it in the book, so it can be a bit confusing. I do know that they cover special populations for youth, pregnant people, elderly, and so that might be something that you want to review.
Right. So now I'm like, I need to go back because I'm thinking that I can figure it out based on I'm like, okay, no, because
Yeah.
there was no way. Because I was like, I was surprised that they couldn't do dynamic stretching.
Yeah. Well, another thing too with these multiple choice questions, you might only get one or two questions that are like that. And so stressing a lot over it is not something that you want to do. I mean, you're going to have four possible choices, and if you identify exactly what the question is asking you, most likely you're going to be able to eliminate a couple of choices from those multiple choice, and then
Yeah.
to be able to choose between two. Don't sweat it. Bookmark the ones that you're not for sure on, and then quickly get through the ones that you do on the exam is going to help you, because then you can go back to the bookmark questions, finish them, and press submit and be done with it.
Yeah. And I think most, like I said, most of the questions I'm missing is these questions with where I'm probably overthinking it because I'm like, oh, it has one leg. Okay, then that should be balance, and then it'll be, strength. And I'm like, how did they
Yeah.
get that? So I'm missing a
Totally.
lot of those questions and stuff.
Well, let's go over overactive and underactive and
Okay.
kind of the prepared material that I had for today. And then at the
Yes.
end, if you want to go over some of those uh, different exercises that, and at least the way NASM approaches them, I can go over where they are in the portal, where they are in the book, kind of guide you on the mentality through those.
Okay.
And that should help you be able to kind of move, get unstuck from that place.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we really love this tier. This is the level 0, and this is where we help trainers like yourself get your textbook certification. And then level 1 is for learning programming, anatomy, how to build a book of business, like those business skills, trade skills, people skills, so that you can then become qualified and not have to wait months and months and months to start training. Um, for many of you, if you're watching this for a recording, or for those who are here, you might have seen our cheat sheet. And that goes over some of the main topics that you're most likely going to see that are covered on the exam. So if you don't have that yet, let me know. All you have to do is go to our podcast, which is free, listen to an episode, give us a 5-star rating, and then send me or Chris a screenshot of that. You can email info@showupfitness.com, or you can send me an email, ashley@showupfitness.com, and we will send you that cheat sheet right over. That's been helping a lot of people get started and not experience that overwhelm from the huge book, right? So for overactive and underactive, this is all about muscle balance, and that's actually chapter 12 in the book and in the portal. On in the book, I think it's page like 382, where you start looking at the postural movement and performance assessments, the overhead squat assessment. NASM is really, really obsessed with postural assessments and posture and foam rolling and lengthening short and tight muscles and strengthening weakened and lengthened muscles. We call those short and tight muscles overactive. We call the weakened and lengthened muscles underactive, and knowing where they are on the body is going to be really important for the test specifically, because if you know the NASM word for these muscles and where they are in the body, you're going to be have a much higher chance of knowing exactly what that question is asking you. So, for example, when we start with underactive muscles, NASM is talking about the weak and lengthened muscles that happen during altered length tension relationships between those muscles. So you're going to see the key terms. Do you know what they are for this scenario for muscle imbalances? What comes to mind? Reciprocal inhibition, altered reciprocal inhibition, synergistic dominance. Have you guys heard these terms before? Right. So there is a communication between the agonist, which is the main mover, and the antagonist muscle. And so that communication between the two, when the neural drive decreases, then you have altered reciprocal inhibition. And that creates an imbalance in the muscle. And then when one of the muscles takes over and gets really short and tight, you have synergistic dominance, and that's overactive muscles, and then underactive muscles. So the underactive and weak muscles, some of the main ones, and you guys might want to take notes on this, because if you just get a flashcard out and you write the underactive muscle on one side, under or whatever it is, so anterior tibialis, we'll start there, anterior tibialis, and then on the other side write underactive, and memorize that, and you know where it is on the body. So who knows where the anterior tibialis is? Anybody want to guess?
Oh, down, it's at the bottom, like back, the front of the leg and the, the bottom, below
Yeah,
the.
no, that's right. The front of the tibia,
Yes.
tibialis. So the Latin words of this actually does you a favor, because it kind of tells you where It is, and if you know the bones, then you're gonna be able to kind of have an idea of where these muscles are. For example, the glenohumeral joint. If you know where the humerus bone is, the glenohumeral joint is the shoulder, right? Some trainers, a lot of trainers that are NASM educated or textbook educated, they don't necessarily know that, and you should know that. You should know that all of the sits muscles are stabilizers of the rotator cuff and the shoulder, right? And know what they stand for. And that's knowing your anatomy so that you can be a qualified trainer. Knowing how the muscles move the bones and move the body is really important so that you can go in and not be strapped to only programming according to a model that doesn't necessarily fit the needs of the actual client. But you can walk in 1 or 2 minutes, assess the client, know what they're capable of, and then program on the spot according to the core movement patterns because you know how the body moves. That's how we program here at Show Up Fitness. It's a core accessory program method, and it allows you to react on the spot. Let's say everybody's using a bunch of equipment in the gym, and what you had planned and programmed for that client, none of the equipment is available. What are you going to do? You need to know how to progress and regress according to the movement pattern that you knew that you programmed according to their goals. So we cover all of that in the level 1, where you start learning anatomy, you start learning the core movement patterns and all of the muscles, not all of the muscles, but the 17 muscles around the shoulder, the 20 muscles around the hip, and their actions, so that you know exactly where this is. And when you're memorizing the overactive and underactive muscles, and you're memorizing the anatomy that NASM wants you to know, knowing where they are on the body is super important because it's going to do you a favor on test day. So anterior tibialis, we said that was the anterior meaning
Front.
In front,
front, exactly. Posterior meaning
back,
back, lateral,
side.
side. Yeah. So knowing your anatomical locations is going to be really important too. Proximal, distal, superior, inferior, like knowing what those mean. Because the NASM test question is going to guide you based on these anatomical locations and give you an idea of what they're talking about. VMO, who knows what that stands for?
Vastus medialis. No, vastus. That's the knee one, right? Is that the knee?
Right.
No.
It's one of the
That's-
4 quadricep muscles in the quadricep group, and it's vastus medialis
Oblique? No.
oblique, right?
Okay.
So it's that teardrop muscle, which I don't know where they get oblique from, but because it's not your abdominals, but it's okay. Yeah, so that's another underactive muscle. How about, excuse me, the gluteus maximus and medius? Which ones are those?
Your butt.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody wants a big booty.
Right.
Gluteus maximus, the big guy in the back. Gluteus medius is the smaller one on the side. And then you also have the gluteus minimus, which is underneath that. But for the purposes of NASM and knowing what those underactive muscles are, it's going to be the gluteus maximus and the glute med, the anterior and posterior muscle fibers. So then you have your middle trapezius and your lower trapezius. Where are your traps?
In the back.
Yep, on the top, right?
Mhm.
And then you have your deep cervical flexors. Do you guys know where that is?
Neck.
Yep, like it's underneath
Oh,
there.
so this side.
Hmm? Well, it's, yeah, it's like, it's on both sides here underneath. Overactive, you're going to have your sternocleidomastoid, which actually runs down across there, but the ones that are underneath, those deep cervical flexors, those are going to be the underactive ones. And like I said before, this is something that you literally just want to flashcard and memorize and know, because some people want to memorize the muscle imbalance and the lower cross, upper cross, and pes planus charts for the overhead squat assessment and all of the underactive muscles that go along with that. Yes, you can do that and do that on repeat. However, If you simply memorize if the muscle itself, where it's located is underactive or overactive, that's going to do you a favor on test day, because then if you identify what the question is asking you and where that muscle is located, you're going to be able to use deductive reasoning to eliminate the wrong answers, identify the right one rather quickly, and move on from that question. The next one, rhomboid major and minor. Do you guys know where those are?
Yep. In the back also.
Yep, basically in between your shoulder blades underneath the trapezius. Then you have your transverse abdominis. This is the muscle that engages when you brace. So the bracing, like if you were to like karate chop somebody right in the torso, like that's your transverse abdominis, like your core. Then you have your internal abdominal oblique, your teres minor, your serratus anterior. That's like, they call this like the boxing muscle, like the Rocky muscles. It looks like a serrated knife or something on the side. So that helps with the protraction of your scapula. That is an underactive muscle. And then you have a couple more, the posterior deltoids. Where is your posterior delt? Yep. Right along there, like so lots of those deltoids on the posterior side. Why is my Zoom giving me a thumbs up? I don't know how to turn that feature off, by the way. I'm gonna have to look into that. And then let's see here. I think that's good, but your overactive and underactive muscles, what does NASM want you to do in order to fix them?
Foam roll for the overactive, and the other ones need to be strengthened.
Right? Yeah.
Overactive.
So for the overactive muscles, they're going to want you to foam roll for how many seconds?
30 seconds.
Yep. And then static stretch for how long?
30 seconds.
Yep, you got it. And then warm up for 10 minutes. Now, I would never train somebody that way, so just memorize it for the test and then forget it afterwards, because when you take our level 1, you will learn how you assess a client and how you get them moving rather quickly and strengthening their muscles and getting them into strength training and programming for them rather quickly, instead of having them foam roll for all this time and then go into stretching and then warm up, and suddenly it's 35-40 minutes later and you haven't even gotten to your program yet. Your client won't return to you, but you need it for the test, so we're here to learn it. So for underactive muscles, you're going to strengthen them with what tempo?
The 4-2-1 4-2-1-1.
Yep. And what does the 4-2-1-1 stand for?
The 4 is for eccentric, 2 is for the isometric, and then 1 is for the concentric, and then 1 is for the isometric again.
Eccentric.
Eccentric, sorry.
Yep, you got it. Yeah, that's good. So the 4-2-1-1, which is basically phase 1 tempo, correct? So for the OPT model, they're going to want you to know all of the acute variables around resistance. So we're talking about rest, reps, how many sets, intensity, is it vertical loading, horizontal loading, the duration of the acute variables, and what am I missing?
Sets, reps.
Did we say intensity?
I don't know.
Intensity is one of them. And then also you're going to want to know if we're talking about supersets or not, and which phase has what kind of superset, right?
Yeah.
So these are all good to know so that you know, according to NASM, how to program and where to plug your client into programming after you have assessed them with the overhead squat assessment. So who can tell me what some of the overactive muscles are? I've told you what the underactive are. And so now we're going to move on to overactive.
gastrocnemius, soleus,
Yep.
the hip flexors, your upper traps.
What does NASM like to call the deep hip flexor?
Oh, what did they like to call it? Oh,
Mhm. And you'll only
sure,
see it.
quad. Those are your quads, right? So,
So
or
you'll see
oh,
NASM using the term, well, go ahead.
rectus femoris.
Yep. So that's an overactive muscle. That's a part of the quads. But when I'm talking about the hip flexors specifically, they have a term that they like to use that you'll see.
Don't know that.
It's called psoas major, and it's
Oh,
spelled PSOAS. So anytime you see psoas or psoas major, they're talking about the deep hip flexors, and it will always be overactive. So yep, you got gastrocnemius and soleus. Which one is most superficial?
the gastroc.
Mm-hmm. And so for people who might be listening to this later, or for the others here, gastrocnemius is which muscle?
Behind the um below the knee, the calf, no, yeah, the calf muscle.
Yep. So you have your gastrocnemius, which is on top of the soleus. Soleus is more of like the bigger pancake muscle underneath. And then you have your gastrocnemius on top of that. Good. How about your adductors? Is that underactive, overactive?
They are overactive.
Mm-hmm. And there's three. Do you know what they're called? The adductors?
Vastus, let me see. Tensor fascia, is that one of them? Or is that, no, those are in the outside, the inside. No, I don't know.
Well, the tensor fascia lata is an overactive muscle, but the adductors, the
Or on
adductor
the
group
inside.
specifically, you have the magnus, the longus, and brevis. The magnus is the biggest. The longest is the longest. Thank you, Latin. And then the brevis is the shortest one. So NASM won't necessarily ask you specifically what those individual three are, but it's good that you know them and where they are, which is on the inside of your thighs, right? So then you have your upper traps. Those are overactive. And your trapezius has three parts, right? Upper, middle, and lower. So your middle and lower traps are underactive. Your upper traps are overactive, okay? Then you have your pectoralis major and minor. Do you guys know where those are?
Your chest area.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the biggest ones, biggest muscle groups there. And then you have your vastus lateralis. That's one of the four quad muscles. And then your lateral bicep femoris. And so those are some of the most common overactive. I'm going to list out for you some of the others that you might see on the test. You're going to have your hamstring complex, your erector spinae. Do you know where your erector spinae is?
Around the spine.
So
Close to
it's going to be your lower back on the posterior side. And yes, it is on either side of your spine. Your scalenes, then you have your sternocleidomastoid, which we had talked about that earlier. That's that big one on your neck. Your levator scapulae, your quadratus lumborum. So that's your posterior core. Your piriformis, that's inside your hip. I believe that is close to oh, what is it? It's gonna come to me. I'll come back to it. Then you said it earlier, your rectus femoris, and then the TFL, which is the tensor fascia lata. So if you guys don't know where those are, go look them up. Like I said, it's important because NASM on the test is probably going to give you a case example or a client scenario where they describe the muscle and they might say, you know, Susie's doing an overhead squat assessment and and they'll even, sorry, words. They will put it into letters, OHSA, rather than spelling it out. And they want you to know this is the overhead squat assessment. So Susie's doing an overhead squat assessment and her arms fall forward. Which of the following muscles do you want to stretch? And you're going to look for the latissimus dorsi, which is the big guy on the back, because NASM wants you to foam roll for 30 seconds, to static stretch for 30 seconds, and then to warm that up for 10 minutes, right? That is their fix for that. You know, you might also see them talk about myofascial release, right? And knowing what that is a good thing, because you being able to understand that's what they're looking for, you're going to be able to eliminate the wrong answers and then choose the one that you know that you've memorized is overactive. Becky or Frank is doing an OHSA, overhead squat assessment. Their knees buckle in, and you might see them talking about which of the following exercises would be appropriate for Becky or Frank. Well, we know that if their knees are buckling in, what is that called?
Ovalgus.
Right? And so if the knees are buckling in, then we know that their gastrocnemius and their soleus is overactive. We know that the adductor complex, which is the inner thighs, that's going to be overactive, and their hip flexors near the front of the hips are overactive. Their underactive muscles that we just talked about is going to be the anterior and posterior tibialis, or their shin muscles on the front of the tibia, and then the gluteus max and med. So appropriate exercise that you are probably going to want to look for is side band walks in the frontal plane, because there's 3 planes of motion: sagittal, frontal, and
Lateral. Oh, transverse.
transverse, right? So knowing what those are is really important. And so they're going to give you a chart, and I think it's on page 391. It's table 12.5. It's the overhead squat solutions chart. And they're going to show you the different distortion syndromes, as they call them, to take a client through an overhead squat assessment, viewing them from the anterior, lateral views, so you can see, you know, which muscles are overactive and underactive based on if their arms are falling forward, if they have a forward trunk lean, if they have a really big arch in the arch of their back, so that you then know how to fix their issues. No, I would never tell a client that they have a syndrome. I think that that's kind of like fear mongering, especially since some of the postural uh, ideology has been debunked. But this is what you need to know for NASM. So we definitely help you through it. We want you to pass quickly. Who can tell me the kinetic chain points, the checkpoints? So this is during the overhead squat assessment, so you can identify which overactive and underactive muscles are firing up. And so you're going to be looking at the client from what we said was the anterior view and the lateral view, right? And you're going to be looking at these 5 kinetic chain points. Do you guys remember what they are?
Feet, knee, the hip, shoulder, and head.
Yep, that's right. And so what is the acronym for the hips that they talk about?
LPHC or something like that.
Yep. Do you know what it stands for?
Lumbopelvic hip complex.
There you go. You might see an exam question where they ask you what it is, and they'll give you some ridiculous words for what the LPHC stand for. So it's good for you to know what the acronym stands for and what NASM specifically is looking for. So the overhead squat assessment, this is one of those things that, you know, a big box gym might have you take a client through a fitness assessment. They'll have you go through the health and lifestyle evaluation form. They'll have them fill out a PAR-Q. Do you guys know what that stands for?
To see how ready someone is. Like
The physical
assessment.
activity readiness questionnaire. Yep. And so the overhead squat assessment, and again, this is chapter 12 in the portal, chapter 12 in the book. This is something that you might want to read a few times just to get an idea of what NASM is looking for. But it's basically a movement assessment, and it's designed to assess dynamic posture, core stability, neuromuscular control of the whole body during a squatting motion. That's actually on page 388 if you have the book. Now, please do not go by the book. You don't need the book. All you need is our cheat sheet and our study guide on these calls, and you're going to pass. We're going to help you do that. But a lot of people do ask me, okay, what page is that on? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Let me go figure that out. So I've written them down for you guys. But you're going to have them go through the arms up with their shoes off. That's the most ideal. You're going to have them do 20 total reps, 5 reps per side twice, anteriorly and posteriorly. And so they're in the upright position, and you're basically checking for the compensations. You're looking for those overactive and underactive muscles. And so that will lead you then to taking them and putting them in the stabilization and endurance phase in the OPT model. So, do you guys have any questions about that? And again, the muscular balance methodology, they're talking about having optimal joint function between muscles around a joint. And so when there's joint dysfunction, that's when you have muscle imbalance. And shortened, tight, very strong muscles then take over. Those are the overactive ones. The underactive ones then become lengthened, inhibited, and weak. And so you're going to want to strengthen those. And so that leads to what NASM calls the 3 distortion syndromes. Do you guys know what those are called? We talked about having knee valgus, but what does NASM call it?
Oh, it's that sort of that P, Pagus. I don't know what it's called. The other one's like upper cross and lower cross, but the Pagus something
I
pes
feel like
planus
you would know it
distortion.
if you saw it.
Yeah, pes planus distortion syndrome.
Yes. Otherwise known as pronation distortion syndrome. And so for pes planus, pronation distortion syndrome, when they have knee valgus, their feet are turned out, their overactive muscles are going to be the hip flexors, aka we talked about it earlier.
Oh,
What does
that's
NASM
right.
call the hip flexors?
Oh, that's right.
It's another P word.
Oh, psoas, the psoas.
Yeah. Yeah. So as the adductors are overactive, and then your gastrocnemius and your soleus. The underactive muscles are your tibialis, your gluteus maximus, and gluteus medius. Okay, so that is pronation distortion syndrome, pes planus. Okay, what's the second one?
The upper, lower cross, upper cross.
Yep. So let's just go with lower cross. What are some of the indicators that it's lower cross? What's going
The
on?
arching, the lower back arches.
Yep. Yep, you got it. So the low back arches, and then what are the overactive muscles?
So the overactive for that is, I know the underactive is the gastric, no, not gastrocnemius, the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, the hamstrings and the abdominals are for the underactive. The
Yep, you got it.
overactive are the hip flexors, would that be the psoas then? Is that what they would, hip flexors? And then
Yep.
the low back, which is the lower traps. No, that would be, those are, oh, those, sorry, that would not be the lower traps.
So remember, we talked about the erector spinae.
Oh, okay.
We talked about, so for the hip flexors, you might see NASM talking about the rectus femoris, the psoas, the TFL,
Okay.
right? For the hip flexors.
Uh-huh.
You might see them talking about the large back muscle, the
Okay.
latissimus dorsi, right?
Oh,
And
that's right.
then your lumbar extensors, which you mentioned, the lower back. So that's lower cross. And then upper cross, what do you see whenever there is upper cross syndrome going on?
The neck juts forward.
Yep. So the neck juts forward. What else?
Neck juts forward. Wrap the back rounds.
Yep. Yep, you got it. And so what would be underactive then?
Underactive would be the middle and lower traps.
Yep.
And then the neck, the deep cervical flex extensors or flexors?
Flexors.
Flexors.
Yeah. Good. And then you also have your mid back muscles, which are called what?
Mid back muscles. The traps. Is that or the
Your
rhomboids?
rhomboids.
Rhomboids.
Yep. I mean, you did say the mid and lower traps, but then you also have the rhomboids underneath that. So, okay, good. And then overactive muscles for upper cross syndrome.
Pectoralis major, minor. No, pectoralis major.
Yep, major and minor.
Major and minor.
Yeah,
And
you got
then
it.
the levator scapula
Mm-hmm.
and the upper traps.
Yep. And one more, neck muscle.
The one right, sternocleidomastoid.
Yep. Sternocleidomastoid. Sternocleidomastoid.
Sternocleidomastoid.
Say that 10 times fast. Good. Yep. So you got it. All right. So when you're looking at these 5 kinetic chain points from the anterior view, which is the front, when you see the feet turn out, that's your visual cue for knowing what the overactive and underactive muscles are. And like I said, rather than memorizing a chart like that, just memorize the muscles on a flashcard, overactive, latissimus dorsi, and know where it is on the body. Because then no matter what situation you're in, if they tell you, okay, from the lateral side, the low back is arching, are the overactive muscles, the TFL, the hamstring complex, the hip flexors, or the anterior and posterior tibialis. You'd be like, well, duh, there's only one possible answer for that because hip flexors are always overactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to most likely give you 2 blatantly wrong answers, and then 1 is right, 1 could be right, but not all the time. And so you being able to just identify, get rid of the ones that are not, and then use deductive reasoning in your memory to know, and the fact that you know where these muscles are on the body to help you out, which is good. Okay. So how are you guys feeling about this so far? Are y'all like, ooh?
Mm-hmm.
See, I can tell that you are almost ready for your test, because I know that if you were to see it, you'd be able to be like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. But being able to like me question you guys and you say it from memory, that is going to be really helpful, because I always, this, at least how, when I was going through this, when I was studying, I was listening to the podcast, I was listening to our YouTube channel and listening to the information over and over and over again. I was also writing it out when I was writing my flashcards. I was reading it because I was reading the book, but I was also looking at the study guide at the most important topics, and then having somebody to quiz you is really helpful because it really tests your knowledge to prepare you for this thing. So all of our curriculum, you're just starting, so it doesn't okay, Monica. Yeah, no, I totally get that. It doesn't necessarily make sense right now when you're first starting out, but it definitely will as you go through the study guide and the roadmap to pass. I would spend maybe 30 minutes a day reading through the study guide and just getting through it so that I could absorb kind of what the information looks like, what these muscles sound like, because even if you've never studied anatomy before, it can sound really weird saying gastrocnemius or tensor fasciae lata or sternocleidomastoid, and you're like, what? This is so foreign to me. But the more that you expose your brain to it, the easier it's going to be, and it's just going to click one day. And should you put everything on flashcards? Our study guide actually tells you the key terms, and the cheat sheet tells you the key terms to flashcard. So if you have that in front of you, there are some pretty common key terms that you're going to see over and over and over again, like proprioception, which is always going to be phase 1 in the OPT model for stabilization. You're going to hear altered reciprocal inhibition, autogenic inhibition, and the differences between those. If you have questions about that, you can always reach out. Those are going to be some that you might be like, I need a little bit more time to understand the relationship. One thing that really helped me and being exposed to the Show Up Fitness curriculum, the way that we do it is if you see autogenic inhibition, you're going to want to choose Golgi tendon. And you can read a lot about that and why, but if you memorize the NASM nuances for the language and what they're looking for, it's going to help you save a ton of time. For example, knowing that they consider overactive muscles short and tight. Because on the exam, you might see a question that describes a muscle being short and tight, and then you having and they might not even say overactive, but you knowing that short and tight muscles are overactive muscles are going to help you because you've memorized what they are. So we help you guys with that NASM language and the nuances around that. So some of the top topics that you're going to want to make sure that you know your planes of motion. Okay. You're going to want to study the OPT model and all of its acute variables within resistance. Of course, the overactive and underactive muscles, which is what we went over today. The anatomical locations and the terms that NASM uses for that, we went over that earlier. Progressions and regressions within the OPT model. I know we're going to talk about that here in a second. How to assess a client, like the overhead squat assessment, and then leading into single leg squat assessments, and then pushing and pulling assessments. These are things that NASM wants you to take your client through when they first walk in the doors and they want to be assessed for being able to do personal training with you. Push-up test, a bench press strength assessment, a squat strength assessment, vertical jump assessment, long jump assessment. These are things that they also encourage for special populations too, like youth, particularly because they think that kids will have more fun in those type of assessments, which is fine. I'm all about helping your client have fun. But knowing what those individual ones are is helpful. And then also behavior change. So the stages of change. And you'll see that on your cheat sheet as well. We're talking about pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance. I highly suggest that you guys memorize the timeframes around those. That makes it easier to remember which one comes in which order. Monica, you asked knowing all anatomical locations. I'm just talking about the most basic ones that they're going to use to identify locations on the body. So we talked about this earlier: anterior, posterior, lateral being like the side view. Then you have superior being above, inferior being below, proximal being most farthest away, proximal being the closest, distal being the most farthest away from the heart. Those are the type of anatomical locations I'm talking about. Let's see. I think that about covers it. Let's talk about progressions and regressions for a little bit, because I know that you guys had some questions about that. So I know we talked about special populations with pregnant women, modifying the overhead squat for them and skipping single leg, standing only exercises. I just don't think that you're necessarily going to get very many more questions than that. It might be like one or two max. I don't know what else they could ask you other than, what kind of exercises to do. Like, which of the following assessments should be avoided for a pregnant client? You might see overhead squat, single leg squat, pushing test, or back squat. Obviously, a pregnant woman is going to be able to do almost all of those, but you're going to want to avoid the single leg squat. We talked about static stretching versus dynamic stretching in 3 planes of motion. That's actually chapter 14. And knowing the OPT model and what the types of exercises that you're going to see in that's chapter 13, 3 levels, the 5 phases, that's going to be on page 428. I would say take a look at the exercises that you see, especially for phase 2 and phase 5, because you might get some questions on what those supersets look like. I would kind of start there.
What page was that again?
That's on 428. And so for those of you who don't have the book, which is totally okay to not have the book, you're going to want to look in chapter 13, like the end of chapter 13. That's when they start talking about the different phases of the OPT model and what the supersets look like in phase 2, as well as they introduce towards the end, like the different training principles and the training concepts that you'll want to know. And that's when they start going into the different progressions and regressions for core training, balance training, plyometric training, SAQ training. What does SAQ stand for?
Strength, agility, and quick.
Yep. So you're going to have specific exercises within SAQ that look different from like resistance training. And so it starts going into what those different ones are in chapter 14. Okay. Chapter 16 starts going into some of the strength and power exercises, like the prone iso ab, which is what NASM calls a plank, or marching, which is a bridge position, lifting the legs up and down. Knowing triple extension, which is your hip extending, your knee extending, and your ankle in plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion is when your toes are up. Plantar flexion is when they're pointed down. In triple extension, that's what it looks like. It's in plantar flexion. And so there's progressions then on page 528 for that, which is chapter 16. That's the core training concepts with the progressions and regressions. And so when we talk about that, progressions and regressions within the OPT model, that is specifically where you're going to want to look, which is chapter 16. If you want page numbers for that, I do have them. So just reach out, let me know. So you guys are doing good. I'm really excited to continue these calls with you. Again, the level 0, we go over all of this stuff and we help you get through the study guide, the cheat sheet, and give you the most important topics so that you guys can spend most of your time looking at those and not feel so overwhelmed trying to read that book from cover to cover. Okay. And then after you pass your NASM, most people do it within 30 days. You want to start your level 1 here with Show Up Fitness because we teach you programming and anatomy and how to build a book of business. We teach you how to build your resume, how to walk into a gym and interview, and knowing how to program on the spot is going to get you hired really quick. I have to say, instead of like trying to memorize all of this OPT model stuff. So thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We would love to see you next week where we'll announce what the topic is going to be in a few days, but invite a friend. We're going to be meeting once a week, every Thursday at this time. And the recordings, if they are deemed to have been a good call and people showed up and we went over the concept, then they'll be dropped in the app. Okay. So if once you join the level 0 and you get into the on-demand app, it's kind of like a Netflix app. You have pre-recorded NASM calls where you just go through them one by one and you follow your roadmap. And that is going to help you get ready for the test. And of course, being able to come and drop your questions here on these live Zooms every Thursday, you have that mentorship, you have the supervision to help you know what's what and know what's important here and to be able to learn it more quickly. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you guys so much. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. You can email us info@showupfitness.com or ashley@showupfitness.com. You can also reach out to me on social media. I am on Facebook. It's Ashley Kellum Garcia, or on Instagram, it's the.ashley.garcia. You can send me a message anytime. I would be happy to help you guys, and so glad y'all are here. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, y'all.